Hello and welcome to Project Virtual Conference 15. My name is Steve Caseley and I'm happy to be one of your early speakers in this very exciting virtual conference. I do hope, however, that you're not listening to me speak on this recording because that means we are actually having some technical difficulties and we've had to resort back to this pre-recorded session. But obviously better to be safe than sorry. And the big issue is if you're listening to this recording, there won't be any time for questions and answers. But let's, again, hope that I'm making this recording all for naught. Anyway, Steve Caseley here. The discussion is Waterfall and Agile, the benefits of living together in Project Online or Project Server. And as I said, my name is Steve Caseley. I'm with an organization called Sensei Project Solutions. Sensei Project Solutions is a Microsoft Gold partner. We were their Partner of the Year in 2014. And our focus is exclusively on helping organizations implement Microsoft Project and Project Server to create enterprise portfolio and resource management situations in the PMO. And to that end, we have created an agile solution within the Microsoft Project Server, Project Online environment to ensure that organizations are able to have a single cohesive environment that goes across both traditional waterfall approaches as well as the emerging agile scrum approaches. A little bit of history on myself. I've been doing it for some time. You can see I've got lots of gray hairs. I've been doing project management consulting really most of my career. I did start as a developer and worked up through the ranks. But over the last 20 years, I've been exclusively focused on helping organizations implement project management best practices. But enough of me. Let's focus on our presentation topic for today, which is integrating Agile and Waterfall into a single environment, and specifically how Sensei has been able to achieve this using the Microsoft Project Solution, and we have extended the Microsoft Project Solution through what we're calling the Sensei Agile PPM. What we have done in a nutshell, and you'll see this in actual live detail as we get in further into the discussion, we have value added in Microsoft Project and Project Online the fields, the forms, the functionality needed to allow us to very effectively manage agile projects within the confines or within the definition of what Microsoft Project is. So literally we have used standard extensibility as defined by Microsoft. There is no custom code. There is nothing in our solution that would ever make it not upgrade compatible with new releases from Microsoft. But we have added in all of the appropriate functionality needed to make project work in an agile fashion. So we have stories, we have sprints, we have story points, and so on. The key thing that we've done is A, as I just said, the value adding of the agile functionality, but B, we are also consciously not using some of the functionality that is inherent in Microsoft Project, specifically the leveling engine and the resource leveling functionality, because they're largely not needed in an agile project, where agile projects are developed in iterations of sprints, and the capacity, the velocity of each iteration is determined by the story points, not by the resource utilization. So we are consciously not using that aspect of Microsoft Project, but that's fine. The beauty of Microsoft Project is it's an extremely powerful, flexible, nimble tool, and we have simply chosen what features of Microsoft Project we want to use for Agile and what we will not. But because Project is this very flexible tool, we can use exactly the same solution for what Project is known for worldwide, and that's for delivering the traditional waterfall projects, which are the larger, fully scheduled, fully resource level projects where all of that functionality we just consciously didn't use on Agile is used throughout. In order to help organizations get started using our Agile solution, we have baked in a series of best practices and process guidance so that people who are very familiar with using Microsoft Project will be able to pick it up and use it in an agile sense on a very, very flexible, very active process. And lastly, to borrow a term that Gartner Group is proposing right now, is it supports full bimodal delivery. And again, bimodal is a Gartner terminology, but it is focused on providing fully integrated solutions, allowing both traditional and iterative projects to develop in a single tool environment. And that's what the Agile PPM does, is allowing these to be integrated into the traditional project world. So we start off, all projects are published from Microsoft Project into Project Server, which was the first slide that went by a little too quick there, where we basically have the ability to have all projects, whether it's a traditional project, whether it is an agile project, or whether it is a support or any other piece of work undertaken in your organization, is all part of the enterprise PMO portfolio, and therefore at that point in time it is simply another schedule in the enterprise. And at this point there is no need to differentiate between agile, between support, and between traditional. It is simply a schedule that uses resources, that has costs associated with it, that is used in the enterprise world. But because we have the schedule published to PWA, we have the full functionality of PWA with SharePoint sites and project sites and timesheets and all of that available to our agile projects. And that's one of the key features I believe we get from integrating agile into this traditional delivery environment, so they get the full functionality of the PWA project site to support any and all incremental project environment specifics that may help with the agile team. For example, story cards can be maintained within the PWA document site. Action items that come up from the daily stand-ups can be recorded in action items. So with a little bit of creativity, I have a high degree of confidence that most agile teams will look for very, very powerful ways they can extend and leverage the functionality of the SharePoint project site functionality in PWA. And finally, one of the key features I believe of the bimodal, of the fully integrated solution, is now the team member has a single source for recording all work done in the organization. Whether this week they're working on traditional and agile and support work, and next week they're working on pure agile projects, the timesheet will reflect exactly what it is that the organization expects them to work on, and gives them a single point of entry for time reporting against all IT work. And I believe that is a huge, huge benefit. Secondarily, is by having all the project work on the timesheet, it also gives the organization the opportunity to have full enterprise resource capacity and demand management. Again, doesn't matter whether the resource is working on a traditional, a agile, or support. They know exactly what it is each individual team member is working on a week by week, month by month, quarter by quarter basis, so they can ensure that all of their resources are properly consumed, that they aren't over allocated, and equally that they aren't under allocated. And that to me is the huge benefit of having all your project and all of your support, for that matter, integrated into a common environment. Full visibility into the demand and the capacity of every single resource in the organization. In order for the Microsoft Project solution to support being agile, we have built an agile process that is absolutely based on the writings of the Scrum Alliance or the Agile Alliance, and it basically defines how the stories, i.e. a task inside Microsoft Project, but because we're speaking agile here, I will keep with the terminology, how the stories progress from being identified to where the business SMEs are working to develop the story card as a type of user I need to do a process so that a valuable business result is achieved, to the point where the business says, I believe the story is ready. I think if the team should be able to pick up the story and now write the code, to the point where we move to the right-hand columns where the team says, okay, can I do the story point estimation? Yes or no. Then they develop the story point estimation using standard agile estimating processes. And finally, we assign that story to a sprint and a release, and then it is scheduled for work. all within the confines of Microsoft Project. So in order to do that, we have done some value add inside Microsoft Project. We have added in a couple of toolbars. We have an Agile Analyzer, which we'll talk about in just a second, as well as a series of Agile reports to ensure that all of the information radiators that the Agilists believe are fundamental to being Agile, burn down charts, burn up charts, we're able to create all of those within the confines of Microsoft Project. And more importantly, because we now have the larger vision of the project, we can do a higher level report ratings as well, where we can look at things like resource utilization across the project to help us, again, manage the overall availability of resources. And you may say, well, why is John and Mary and Kim so underutilized? They happen to be business SMEs, so I wouldn't expect them to be utilized on my Agile project at near the level that the true dedicated team members would be, which are the people with the higher bars. So very, very, very functional, Agile, and resource management reporting available within the tool set. And then we look at the Agile Analyzer itself, where we have added in a specific ribbon for being Agile and all of the extension of Microsoft Project to be Agile. So if you look at the bottom part of my screen, you can see we have a significant number of fields that have been added to be Agile. Stories, whether it's sprint ready, whether it is assigned to the sprint, what type of story it is, what's the priority for the story, what's the status, is it ready for the team to do story point estimation, or is it still in progress where the business is developing the story card? And then finally, the all-important story points and the ability to add the story points together. So we see that the first two stories, the student phone number search and the identify duplicate students, are added up and give us a story point total for sprint number 3 of 48 story points. And if our velocity for a sprint is, let's say, 50, then we're in absolutely good shape. And we have all of the stories and just the right number of stories identified that will be scheduled for working on in the upcoming sprint, which would be sprint number 3. Recognizing that Agile is more than just stories. Stories are the unit of work that's scheduled into sprints. The Agile solution also has the ability to define epics, where epics are simply large components, large functionality that the business wants that will eventually be decomposed into stories. So we can have an epic for the student address. And then we have all of the stories that are going to create that epic of capturing the student address, exploring address verification methods, and so on. And for projects that like to do further decomposition of the stories into team tasks, we also have that as well in the middle. So the story of validating that the student is registered can be decomposed into tasks so that we have a coding task and a design task, for example. And at the very bottom, we have the ability to manage the individual status of all of our stories within a sprint. So we can see what stories are in coding, what are in design, what's in QA, and so on. Now, all of this I'm going to describe as optional functionality. Depending on how each organization implements Agile, the functionality specific to decomposing stories into tasks and manage the exact status of the stories within a sprint is not something that all Agile organizations do, in which case we simply choose not to use that functionality. The same way we've already premeditated that we're not going to use resource leveling and complex schedule development, we can absolutely make the same conscious decision. So the good news is it's extremely flexible and allows us to set up the implementation to support whatever method of being Agile you choose to use in your organization. And then finally, to help ensure that all of the Agile processes are being followed, we've also built in a series of process validations. So in the ribbon, we see we have a series of buttons associated with story maintenance. These are to be used by your business owner, by your product owner, to say, what do I need to work on today? What are the new stories that have been added? Or what are the stories that are in progress? Maybe I have to hurry up the SMEs to keep the stories progressing. What are the stories that I believe are ready to hand off to the team, and so on? And then the latter right-hand side of that ribbon is a series of validations. Is anyone breaking the rules? Has anyone tried to declare a story ready for development where in fact there's no story type or the priority hasn't been set? So fairly complex and fairly rigorous process validations have been baked into this Agile solution as well. And that's key because we want people who are very familiar with using Microsoft Project to be equally comfortable as they move forward into being agile, or if you're a true agilist and your organization has chosen to implement agile into a non-agile tool such as Microsoft Project, we absolutely want to make it as easy and as painless as possible for that transition. Therefore, again, we have all of the process support, and we have baked into our template all of the granularity for people new to Agile to help them absolutely ensure they're following Agile processes. Or if you're a tried and true Agilist, again, you simply make your decision that I'm not going to look at this degree of functionality, i.e. I don't have to bother saying I need to remove stories and decompose stories and prioritize stories. I've been there, I've done that, I've got half a dozen t-shirts. I simply want to move on with being agile. So with that, enough of the PowerPoint. Let's have a look at all of this inside Microsoft Project itself. So here I am inside Microsoft Project with literally the same functionality available we looked at just a few moments ago. I am specifically on my add-in ribbon called the Agile Analyzer, and I have all of the views that I would need to be agile within, and I'm going to keep calling Microsoft Project a non-agile tool called Microsoft Project, so that we can deliver the same functionality that some of the other agile-focused tools are going to allow us to use. I think it's absolutely key that we have the same degree of functionality inside Microsoft Project as we would have in some of the other commercially available agile tools, because we certainly don't want to give away anything, lose functionality to move to having an integrated tool. So therefore, again, this focus right here is on product backlog. Business owner comes in and says, what's in my backlog? Has a good look at it and say, okay, tentatively I've scheduled out the student phone number, and let's add a little bit more real estate in there. Student phone number and identified duplicate students is what I want to work on for the next sprint. As we discussed earlier, at this point in time, my story point count is 48. If my velocity is 50, I'm in good shape. But then he's going to start looking forward. Okay, sprint number 4, what's going on? At this point in time, I only have a single story identified, and I see it's not even ready for the team to do their story point estimation on. So again, this may be one of those where the product owner needs to do a little bit of hurrying of the SMEs, and the product owner is also going to say, you know what, that certainly isn't enough to keep the team busy. I wonder what else I should be putting into that sprint, and simply looks through the backlog, and yes, my backlog is very tiny, but he's going to go through and say, which one of these would have value to me to add into the next sprint, and maybe address to zip validation, or maybe selecting minor story study is going to be. So he says, okay, yes, those make sense. Let me get to a view where I can change the release priority and say, okay, I want that guy to be in release 1 and sprint number 3, as well as I think that guy should be into release 1, sprint number 3. So this is the one aspect where I would have to say the Microsoft Project solution doesn't have the same degree of glamour that we would have with other agile tools, because it is very much a row and column based function. So now I'm beginning to say, yeah, that feels more like the amount of effort that the team should be able to do in a sprint. I'm feeling more comfortable with that. But again, as the product owner, I'm going to say, I've got to do a lot of hurrying with my SMEs if I'm going to get all that work done. I've got several of them that the SMEs haven't even gotten started on, but you know what? I want to get them started, so I'm going to bump those up to in progress. So it's going to start to show up on their thing. Is the minor study, what type of a story is it going to be? Well, maybe I need the SME to do that, or maybe I, the product owner, have the ability to say that on my own. Yes, that's definitely a business story. And I'm using the functionality in the tool to actively manage my product backlog and move it forward so that the team can begin to work on it. And the product owner would continue to do this on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis using some of the process support we got built in. So again, first thing in the morning, going to come in, what are the new stories? Selects it and says, because it's highlighted, this is a new story. So ensuring the student is eligible. As a product owner, do I think that is a story that's appropriate for including into my student registration system? Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to accept that one. So we will move that one forward, and we will start to say it's not started. Perfect. Now, what are all of the ones that are in progress? What are the ones that I need to hurry up my SMEs on to get them moving forward? And we have all of that. Or what are the ones that I think are story ready that I need to make sure that are passed over to the development team? I'm going to read that one last time. The development team is going to be ready for it. Or what are all of the stories that the development team has approved and are ready to move forward? Or what are all of the stories that are in story point complete, and so on? And I don't have any data staged into that particular configuration at this moment. But again, very, very active development, as well as the story validation. Are there any stories where the story type isn't set? Are there any where there's no priority, and so on? I think you can appreciate that the validation steps are going to go through and confirm that we are following exactly what it is we need to be doing on this project. So this is active management of the backlog. I have two ways to do it. This is my preferred method because it has the groupings into the sprints and the releases. But from a pure raw management of all of the stories, we have another view, which is the story list. And that was the one I flashed to a few moments ago, where I simply wanted to adjust which release and which sprint the stories were associated with. Another key function that the product owner is going to want to have is managing the epics. So if we click on epics, it's going to group all of the stories that are associated with all of the epics. And again, I only have one epic defined in my stage data, but these are all stories that are the product owner has deemed to be part of this larger epic called student address maintenance. And you can see that there's no need that all of the stories associated with an epic are delivered at the same time. These two we delivered up front, and they're already done. You can see their story is complete. This is one I think I'm going to get to, but I'm not even sure where I'm going to get to it yet. And this is one that we're now contemplating doing in two sprints out. So we have all of that. And then when we're in active delivery of a sprint, we have the ability to zero in and say, what are the stories that we're working on in our current sprint? So as you can see here, these are all stories associated with just the current sprint. And we have the ability, if so desired, to decompose the stories into the detailed tasks. As we discussed earlier, this is a coding task and a design task. Or in these two instances, the stories are not decomposed into tasks. They're small enough. You can see the story point count is quite low in this particular instance. And I see I've got a little bit of errors in how I've staged my data, that there's no story points associated with this. But that's just Steve putting together his data too quickly for the demo. Bottom line is we have the ability to very high level of granularity manage the sprints, or we can simply say these are the 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 stories that are in the sprint, associate with them, put the team members on it so we have enterprise resource management, and let the team deal with all of the details in their daily stand-ups. What did I work on today? Or what did I work on in the last 24 hours? What am I going to work on over the next 24 hours? And what are my issues and warnings? Or we can get into very high granularity. So you take this view into your daily stand-up and says, okay, here are the 2 stories we have in coding, or the 2 tasks associated with the stories in this stage, and this stage, and this stage. Bottom line is you can choose the detail that you want to deliver your agile stories, your agile sprints, within a tool called Microsoft Project that is traditionally more focused on large-scale, non-iterative delivery. And then finally, The other huge benefit that I believe from delivering our agile projects in a traditional tool like Microsoft Project is we get to look at the full view of the project. Most of the other agile tools out there in the marketplace are very focused on stories, on backlog management, and on sprint management. But let's face it, there's other things that have to happen on agile projects as well. Before we ever get to the stories level, we need to do a product vision and create our vision for the project. So we have support for all of that built into the template, and because we have the functionality Microsoft Project available to us, we can assign people to the work and therefore allow the people to track time. So we can begin to develop better metrics and better predictability for our sprint. Then we may or may not need a sprint zero. Do we have to establish the norms? Have we been there, done that, got a dozen t-shirts, in which case this is probably not necessary? Or is this early in agile implementation in our organization, and therefore we need to bake in a high degree of granularity to help us better understand the environment? And then we're ready to move into our true agile delivery. So we have release number 1, but again, there's a little bit of upfront traditional stuff. We need to put together our release 1 plan. We may or may not want to track the level of detail that we're going to use at each stage in doing the backlog grooming. Maybe we need a single task assigned to the product owner that's called backlog grooming. Or maybe we want to come up with better metrics that says, okay, where is our product owner traditionally spending most of his or her time? Is it on decomposing epics? Is it on categorizing the stories? Is it? So we can absolutely put the degree of detail in here that we want and collect the metrics that we need. And then finally, we roll into the true agile aspects of the tool, which is each individual sprint. So I have defined my sprint 1 as capture the student. But again, I need to do my stage 1 planning, part 1 planning, where I'm going to work with the product owner and select the stories. I'm going to validate the ready, and I'm going to make sure that I'm within capacity. And the good news, the tool does all of that, and we have the process support to do all of that. And then the team is going to say, okay, you're welcome to stay product owner, but on the same behalf, we're happy going through and doing sprint plan part 2, where we're going to assign the stories, we're going to create our backlog for our sprint, and we're going to produce our sprint vision in an hour or 2. None of these are long tasks, but it just helps us ensure we're following the agile principles. And again, it gives the team somewhere to record the time. If you're doing 2-week sprints and you spend 4 hours at the beginning of every 2-week sprint doing planning, and you spend 4 hours at the tail end of every sprint doing your sprint review and your sprint retrospective, that's actually 8 hours of the 80 hours available. So that's a significant amount of time, absolutely necessary to be agile. But again, in a traditional sense, where are those 8 hours booked? Do we simply let that fall into our velocity and our sprints or our story points? Or do we want to be able to extract it out and says our sprints are really only 9 days long, and therefore we can track and manage our time outside of that? The good news is we can allow it to work either way. It's very flexible with how you choose to roll it out. And then finally, we're really in the sprint. So we're going to do our daily scrum. Again, do you need to track time? Organizational specific, whether you want to or not. But then we actually do the work. So in sprint number 1, we had 3 stories assigned. Capture the student name, the student ID search, and the explore the address verification methods. And if you'll memorize those 3 line numbers, 60 to 62, the key point is there, this is the single same story that we were looking at in the story list. 60, 61, and 62 are those exact same stories, and they would have been on the product backlog view as we moved forward. But the key is at this point in time, we have now made them visible into our, excuse me while I scroll to the right place here. We have now made them visible to a standard schedule viewpoint inside Microsoft Project so that they can be scheduled and managed appropriately. And then finally, we do our sprint review and our sprint retrospectives. Again, do not have to put that degree of granularity into the tool, but I think it absolutely aids in giving metrics, and why not take advantage of the powers of Microsoft Project in those areas and exploit the fact that we have this ability in Project to get these metrics that we wouldn't get in a traditional tool. And then we do it all over again. Then we move into sprint number 2, and our sprint number 2 is focused on student registration, and we do our plan part 1 and our plan part 2 and so on through the entire process. So that is the basic functionality of how we can be extremely agile inside Microsoft Project. And as I said, we have all of the reports that we need to create the traditional information radiators. So we have a Burndown report that's going to basically track and say, we started this particular sprint with 2 stories, and I know my number of stories is relatively tiny. And as they are completed and marked as complete as part of our daily stand-ups, we could see the progress of our stories. Now, in this particular instance, I'm taking things to the wire, and I'm only going to be completing my stories near the exact tail end of my sprint. Or I can look at it from a Burndown work viewpoint. This is functionality that would never be available in a traditional tool, and I will be very honest, is not that agile in and of itself, but for organizations that are more traditional focused, it absolutely gives us the ability to understand how we're doing, both in terms of stories or work, and we can burn down or burn up the work, and we can do the same across all of the releases. This is for our current sprint, and this is for the entire project. As well, because we have all of this baked into a tool called Microsoft Project, we can leverage other functionality and produce a series of reports that I would say are much more related to the level and style of reports that your PMO and your senior manager would be looking at getting. Now, you may say, how can you ever produce a percent complete on an Agile project? And I will be honest with you, I say you really can't with Agile, because you don't know what work is pending, because the backlog hasn't been developed that far. But my flip side to that is, you started up this Agile project with the expectation that it was going to be a 6-month project. So therefore, I would, if percent complete is of value to my product owner and my managers and my PMO, I would put a catch-all task in that basically says remaining unallocated sprint work, and I would simply decrease it by 2 weeks every time a new sprint is initiated, and would actually allow me to develop a relatively accurate percent complete burn down. And I can do the same at cost, same thing, or I could do the same from a resource viewpoint. So very much a high-level overview of how we can use a traditional tool and make it specific to being agile. With that, I'd like to go back to the PowerPoint for just a moment and now focus on what happens inside Project Web App, whether you're working in a cloud-based Project Online or whether you're working in a Project Server on-premises solution. The good news is you publish your Agile project to Project Server Online, and in PWA, you can deliver the same functionality. So another thing you were probably thinking as I was in Microsoft Project that says, this may be okay for a Scrum Master who has been around IT for a while and has a concept of how to use Microsoft Project, but do I really want to teach all of my product owners how to use this tool called Microsoft Project? And I tend to agree with you. So that's why we have baked in the same functionality into PWA so that A, you're not licensing this relatively expensive tool called Microsoft Project to all of your product owners, and B, you're not giving them a tool and forcing them to learn a tool that really isn't that relevant. So again, we can do current sprint management, epic management, all that within the PWA environment itself. And we have the ability to run all of the same reports inside Project Online as well. So let's go on to Project Online and have a look at that. So here I am inside the same project, and if you're familiar with Microsoft Project Online or Server, I take my schedule from Microsoft Project. I would say File, Publish, and therefore all of the information is now available into online. So how do I move it from project desktop to project server? It's as simple as hitting the publish. So now here I have the same project, my student reservation system, and this is where I believe most product owners are going to do their functionality. I have the same views available. Do you want to look at the product backlog, which is the view I'm looking at right now? Do you want to see the complete story list, which is the story, the complete list of all of the stories we have in our environment? Do you want to look at epic management? And I'm not going to go through every single one of these because they're delivering exactly the same functionality to us on the web as we had in the desktop. So again, absolute simplicity in tool delivery, absolute simplicity in training, because now your product owner doesn't need to understand all of the nuances of Microsoft Project, but can still go in and do the same degree of functionality. And as I mentioned in my kickoff, we now have the full project site available to the entire project, not just the product owner, but all of the team members as well. So we can go in and allow them to maintain the documents, the deliverables, the risks, the issues, and everything related to using full SharePoint functionality to value add. And again, the first thing I would suggest you value add into SharePoint is a form called the story card, and all of the, as a type of user, I need to, and all of the definition of done will now be captured in SharePoint with a form that's going to absolute simplify the maintenance of all of that. Because we are in Project Online, all projects, whether they're traditional projects, whether they are agile projects, whether they're support projects, are all published to our project server environment, and therefore we have the ability to go in and do portfolio analysis. We have the ability to go in and look at all projects for all reports to get full enterprise resource management. And as I mentioned, we have the same reports available to us in Project Online as we have inside Project on the desktop. So if we go into reports, and it always goes slow when you're trying to do a demo. Isn't that Murphy's Law? Everything works great until you're trying to do a demo. We go into our Agile reports, and we have exactly the same reports. We can do current sprint, burn down, work, burn up, burn, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no functionality lost as we deliver this inside a PWA environment. The key message here is all projects, all resources are now in the same environment. So we have enterprise PMO portfolio reporting, and we have enterprise resource management. So no longer is little Johnny Eager, who's working on 2 agile projects and a traditional project and has 15 hours a week reserved to do production support tickets, is Johnny Eager forced to work over 40 hours a week, and Johnny Eager is working a proper managed work week. And then finally, if I go back to my PowerPoint, you may say, well, that's all well and good, Steve, but we already are using other tools today in our organization for Agile, and I'm specifically going to call TFS out because TFS obviously is a Microsoft project or Microsoft solution, and therefore you'd be interested, okay, if I'm using TFS to do some degree of Agile management today, where does that leave me with all of this wonderful stuff that you just talked about? And the short answer is it leaves you in an awesome, powerful position. I'm demonstrating integration with TFS, but similar integration is available with other tools, notably Jira is the other tool that we've explored doing this integration with, but there certainly is no reason why we could not do the same level of integration between many or all of the other Agile tools that are out there. But let's focus on TFS to wrap up this discussion. You can use either TFS as your system of record, whereby the stories and the tasks are entered into TFS, as you may be doing directly today, or you may choose to say, I really like the functionality that I've seen inside Project Online to do the basic story maintenance, and then I would like to integrate that back to TFS so that I can use the story to task and tasked to code and tasked to test cases to complete the picture. And the good news is you can go in either direction. But I believe the norm is you start with TFS. Organizations are already using TFS today. So I've got 3 very poorly named stories. I have TFS story 1, 2, and 3 that are already in TFS and are ready to move forward. So then I have an add-in called Team Explorer into Microsoft Project. I'm back in Microsoft Project here. You can see my Agile Analyzer and my Agile reports there. And now I've got the Team Explorer ribbon in there as well. And now we can simply say, okay, what TFS project do we want to move across into Project Server so that we can take advantage of all of the enterprise functionality? So we go in, we pick our project, we pick the query that we're going to use. So for example, maybe we only want to bring across the active stories, the stories that are being worked on in the current sprint is all we want to integrate. We certainly don't need to burden the full production environment with all of the historical unless we need it for metrics. And we certainly don't want to burden it with all of the pending stories that may or may not ever be approved and scheduled for completion. So we absolutely select the stories we want to bring across. We run our query, and then only the stories that satisfy our query comes across into Project Online, and then we publish that to Project Server. And now we have exactly the same functionality. We now have enterprise resource management, we now have enterprise portfolio management, and we have the full view across the organization to make sure, again, that little Johnny Eager is only working 40 hours a week and is not being overburdened by all of the projects that we have him working on. And that all flows through the timesheet. So now, again, Johnny Eager is able to say, these are the 2 projects that are on my timesheet because I brought them across from TFS. These are tasks that are on my timesheet because they were Agile projects being managed exclusively inside Project Server. And there could be other tasks from other traditional projects or other tasks for production support. All in, again, that full integrated, as Gartner calls it, bimodal environment. So that's using TFS as the system of record. The other option is, as I said a second ago, you like the functionality that's available inside Microsoft Project itself. So we're going to say, okay, I only want to bring across the stories that, again, are in active development. The stories that are currently scheduled for being worked on in the current sprint, I want to take out of Microsoft Project and move them over to TFS so that I can then leverage TFS for code management, for test management, for traceability management, et cetera, et cetera. So we select the stories that we want. We define that we want to publish those, same functionality from the Team Explorer. We're going to publish those to Project Server, to TFS. We set the publish flag to yes. And when it's all said and done, we push the button, and the button push takes seconds. It is not a long, elaborate interface. It works very, very fast and very, very effectively. The stories are now brought over into TFS, and now we can have the full functionality of TFS for, as I said, for test management, for code management, and the full systems development and capabilities of Visual Studio and TFS. So, for example, we can do acceptance criteria, storyboards, implementation, test cases, and so on. At this point in time, I really don't have enough time to get into a full demo of the integration. So hopefully, again, if you're listening to this, we've addressed the configuration issues, and I hope and expect we will be able to go back to online and I can deal with any and all questions that you have. But before I open it up for questions, I will say thank you to all of the supporters who have made this wonderful virtual conference possible. Again, I'm really happy and excited to be one of the kickoff speakers for this particular conference. I'm Steve Caseley from Sensei Project Solutions. And if you've seen anything in this particular demonstration that you like and would like to dialogue more with us, here are all of our credentials. And I'll leave that up while we deal with any questions that hopefully you've been able to submit online and answer your questions in the few minutes that we have remaining.